Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Michael for putting this on. I will enhance my resume a bit by including 6 years of service in the United States Army before I made the cardinal error of becoming an attorney. So something I'm proud of. Again, it's just a great honor to be here. I want to talk briefly about the 5th District. For those of you who can read the program, you've seen the title of the talk. I gave that after having spoken to the organizers, and then was delighted when I saw the program because I think it dovetails well with the subject matter upon which you'll be hearing over the coming days. But again, first, the 5th District of Virginia. It is the best, most historic, most significant congressional district in the United States, and absolutely no part whatsoever thanks to myself. And people, I think when I say that every member of Congress is duty-bound to extol the virtues of their district, but I got done in describing the 5th District in a crowd that included the Speaker of the House not too long ago, and after I concluded, he said, "In my district, we make cheese." So let me give you the history of the 5th District. The first member of Congress from the 5th District was a gentleman named James Madison. I tell people that those are some very big, small shoes to fill. When he ran for office, he ran against another man named James Monroe. Upon defeating Monroe, prior to the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, Madison petitioned the General Assembly of Virginia that his good friend and colleague, his travel companion, indeed, over the course of the campaign, should be made a United States Senator, and obviously, ultimately, then Monroe went on to become a United States President and a pillar of American foreign policy, but for the days of Monroe. Also residing in the 5th District was a tall redhead named Thomas Jefferson. And so we are already at a congressional district, one of 435 voting districts that's given us the father of the Declaration and the father of the Constitution. No pressure if your name's Garrett. But it doesn't stop there. Retiring in the 5th District was Justice John Marshall and Patrick Henry, who I like to speak about in a little bit greater length perhaps than some of the other notable luminaries, because I think Henry's example is indicative of who we are descended from. And while Henry's views on the future nature of the federal government and its interaction with state and local government might have differed from those of Jefferson and Madison, his zeal for liberty was unparalleled, and the embodiment through action of his words is probably easier as an example of just exactly what the founders were willing to give than any other founder. When Henry impassionately declared at St. John's, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death," that's my second favorite part of the speech. My favorite part of the speech, I believe, was the only impromptu portion of the speech, which occurred when an individual in the back of the room shouted upon Henry's declaration, "Give me liberty or give me death," "treason," which is tantamount, when I speak to young people, to saying, "Where's the rope and the tree? This guy needs to be hung." Which begat my favorite portion of the speech, which was Henry's response, which was, "If this be treason, make the most of it. We are descended from individuals that recognize the difference between right and wrong, between liberty and servitude, between the ability of a people to pursue their own destiny and the status of a group who have destiny foisted upon them. And these individuals demonstrated their commitment to these principles to the point where the prospect of death wasn't a metaphorical abstract, but indeed a real manifestation of circumstance should they be captured, and they acted anyway." So we have Madison and Jefferson and Marshall and Henry, and in the 5th District of Virginia in 1865, Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant sat at a table in Appomattox and the American Civil War ended. Shortly before that, at Hales Ford in Franklin County, Booker T. Washington was born, whose vision of liberty and civil rights manifests itself in empowering individuals and not taking from others. And then in in the early 1950s, a young woman, a young girl named Barbara Johns, 16 years old, attending the Moton High School in Farmville, Virginia, African-American school, where when it overcrowded, they built tar paper shacks outside, which were heated with single wood-burning stoves for all 12 grades. Listen to her uncle, Vernon Johns, a pastor, who in his education studied the founders, and particularly Jefferson, who wrote a document that was the introduction of the American nation to the world, in which he proclaimed that all people were created equal. Wow. Now, Jefferson was a slave owner, right? And women didn't have the right to vote, right? But in the preamble to the Constitution, we're not told that we've been bequeathed a perfect union. We're told that we seek to create a more perfect union. And so while we inherently, as humans, harbor flaws, and we always will, our duty as free humans is to seek to minimize those flaws and perpetuate the blessings, indeed of God, right? If you believe in natural law, not a coincidence that my daughter's name is Locke, unto those who are our posterity. And so, when a 16-year-old girl mounted the stage at the R.R. Moton High School in Farmville, Virginia, it was Jefferson's words spoken to her by her uncle, a pastor, that motivated her to suggest to the student body at that school that if all people were created equal, there shouldn't be one high school that was brand new, built for the white students, and another high school that was cobbled together as they went for the black students. And she led a walkout that began the civil rights movement in earnest in Virginia. Now, I like to compare Patrick Henry to Barbara Johns. Why? Because over 1,000 people, to include riots, etc., died during the American Civil Rights Movement. And so when a 16-year-old girl mounts a stage in Farmville, Virginia in the early 1950s to say we are equal, then the manifestation of her actions may well lead to the very same outcome that Henry faced, her death. Ultimately, the Johns family moved 3 states away. But the culmination of her effort was that we move ever closer to that more perfect union. And it all happened in the best congressional district in the nation, the 5th District of Virginia. And in the Speaker's District, they make cheese. I don't say that in any way to disparage anyone, but it's important for me to understand where I came from so I can know where I want to go. I tell my children frequently, and I think Locke's probably too young to understand the concept, it's more important to know who you want to be than who you are. Because if you are who you want to be, then you're done, and you might as well get called home. There's nothing left to do. And so our job as a society and a nation and a globe is to understand what freedom means, what it doesn't mean, and to do what we can to perpetuate freedom for individuals. And that perfect vision given to us by imperfect people is the charge that Americans are born into. Reagan said that freedom's never more than one generation away from extinction, and if you can't figure that out by reading the headlines today, then I can't help you. So I think that the name of the talk was something like American Exceptionalism, Origins, Status, and Prospects. Well, there are the origins. That a broken society, led by imperfect people, gave us a near-perfect vision, and that we should aspire ever to be more like that, and the people who bequeathed it to us were willing to die to make it so. And I draw parallels to the American Civil Rights Movement because I think it's important to do that, because liberty movements inherently focus on bestowing upon individuals and others liberty. Collectivist Marxist movements inherently focus on taking from one group and giving to another. Think about that. So that you can, I think, or I can anyway, judge the earnestness and the propriety of a movement based on what the goal is. Is it to tear someone down, or is it to build someone up? Because in tearing someone down, there's destruction, and certainly there are things worthy of being torn down, right? A legacy of slavery, Nazism, global oppressive communism that stymies religious freedom and individual self-determination. But in a vacuum, the goal should always be to build someone up And that is what a liberty movement inherently does. Now, there's an inherent advantage that the collectivists have, and that is by nature of the fact that they're collectivists, right? Collectivists, by definition, seek the approval of others, and therefore they network, and they find people of like mind, or they seek to convert individuals to like mind so that they can justify their own beliefs based on the concurrence and adulation they get from people who think like them. Individualists say, I know what's right and I'm going to do it. Well, I'd rather be the individualist, but understand the advantage that the enemy, that the ideological opponent might have. And then while we don't need the adulation and approval of others to continue to do what we think is right, understand that there's value in preaching the message to others so that they too might understand and then begin to share your values, not for your approval, but for the expansion of the idea. So now we move from an overview of the 5th District, which I think, and I tell people all the time, if I can be the 10th best political figure in the 5th District of Virginia, that they've been well served, right? I mean, it's amazing to think that in one congressional, now I will concede that James Madison's home is now in the 5th, or in the 7th District, but by gosh, he represented the 5th, so we still claim it. But where are we now? I have, in 10 months in Washington, D.C., and praise God, been unable to shake the citizen worldview that I developed over 45 years of being my father's son. What I mean by that is that if you're frustrated, I want you to think how frustrated I am at the inability to accomplish major goals that should be relatively easily accomplished if we could take leadership, and I'm not referring to specific individuals, but those who are in leadership, which I suppose now would include myself by virtue of this position, at their word, right? When there's a member of the United States Senate who's campaigned repeatedly on creating a healthcare system that pushes down the costs of premiums and deductibles so that more individuals might bestow upon themselves and their families the benefits of healthcare, who has 1, 2, 3, 4 opportunities to do just that but doesn't, then there's a problem, right? And why is that? It's very easy, particularly in a multimedia wired-in world, to at least believe you have a sense of what people are feeling. And in a political world, if your aspiration is to perpetuate your own political power, then it makes sense to try to figure out what people are feeling and then cater to those people, to kowtow to those people. I tell people all the time, I'm not here to tell you what I think you want to hear. I'm here to tell you what I believe. My father, God rest his soul, who was my ultimate hero, told me as it related to politics that he really believed, and I think it was embodied by Reagan, that all you needed to do was tell people who you are, what you believe, and what you were going to try to do, and then if you did it, you'd be fine. How simple is that? But the temptation is always to sort of look at snap polling and try to figure out where the populace is and what people want to hear, and then tell them what they want to hear, and I think it works at some level. But let's step back for 5 minutes in this conversation to what we descend from. I'm pretty confident that Patrick Henry didn't stand to speak and say, what is it that the people in this room want to hear? I'm wholly confident that Barbara Johns didn't stride onto that stage having been implored not just by her parents, but by the clergy and by the faculty not to be a rabble-rouser, with the idea that she would say what people wanted to hear, right? So we are descended from people who are willing to stand and sacrifice, and devolved into people who say, what's in it for me? How can I perpetuate my power? How can I ensure that I get an ever better committee assignment or a chairmanship where I'm viable for the next higher office? And it's not hard to see how we got where we are. I like to paraphrase Winston Churchill. I believe he said, democracy is the worst form of government in all the world except for every other. And so the system that we have is incredibly flawed, and it's the worst in the world except for all the others. Ultimately, I would argue that the people who are the subcomponent parts to that system are where the flaws lie. And so we filed, and I'll digress for a moment, and I don't want to talk too much about me, but we filed a discharge petition for a clean health care repeal, by we I mean me, that mirrors the October 2015 discharge or bill that passed with the vote of every single sitting Republican member of the House, Right now we're sitting at 8% of members signed on. Now the difference is in 2017, we've got a guy after whom this hotel is named in the White House who said he'd sign that document. And in 2015, we had the namesake of the legislation and everyone knew he'd veto that document. 92% disconnect between what was right in 2015 and what's right in 2017? I don't think so. Instead, there's a disconnect in the consequences, right? And so look at who is willing to put their money where their mouth is when it's not comfortable, Barbara Johnson, Patrick Henry, and then who changes their tone with the wind, and you'll know who's here for themselves and who's here for posterity. The most indispensable person is the person who knows that they're not indispensable. The cemeteries, as you drive by, I can assure you, are filled with women and men who are sure that when they left this world, everything would go to heck. And some of it did, but not because they're not here. So the priorities of the political class have changed from what's in it for we to what's in it for me. Now, I find it to be a great irony that as a liberty-focused individual, as someone who believes that the greatest minority is the individual, my driving motivation is the collective, right? However, if you think about it, the best thing for the collective is the ability of the individual to be able to determine for themselves what is right for themselves within a Jeffersonian construct, which is that your liberty stops where mine starts. I tell young people when I speak to them, that means if you want to go to the downtown mall in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I think three out of 4 people voted against me, which was a high watermark for the Republican Party in the last 5 elections, and flail around like a stark raving idiot, you certainly can, right up until the point when you flail into someone else, and then you've violated their right not to be flailed into. But the idea that government or anyone in leadership knows better for you what's right for you or your family or your faith than you do is nonsensical at best and ridiculous at worst. If anyone tells you they can help you more than you can help yourself, put your hand over your wallet and slowly move away. So the founders of our nation shared the values, I think, that I expand upon today, and so too did the leaders of the civil rights movement. It wasn't about taking something from someone. The founders easily, as subjects of the crown, could have said the right answer is to depose the king. And you see so many movements that begin to do that, but for them the right answer was, if you wish to be subject to the king, be subject to the king. We do not. And so it wasn't about taking and destroying, it was about taking and giving. And that's the difference between liberty individuals and the collectivist movement. Now, where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. I told my comms director that I was going to work peak oil into this conversation because I occasionally like to try to work things in that blow people's minds. Freedom's not oil. Whether you like it or not, there is an inherent extractable quantity of petroleum on the planet. And at some point, your production hits a level and blah, 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 et cetera. That's undeniable. Freedom's not a zero-sum game. Liberty's not a zero-sum game. So instead of acting as if you must take from someone else in order to bestow the blessings of liberty upon yourself and others, recognize that it is unlimited and capped only by our ability to find it and harness it and bestow it upon others. There is no such thing as peak liberty. And so the future of the movement is great so long as we take the time to engage people to understand that the greatest outcome for the collective mirrors the greatest freedom for the individual. In fact, candidly, as much dark news as there is on the horizon when you speak to 20-year-olds today, and I do it often, 41 public high schools in the 5th Congressional District, we've been to 24 of them. I will get to all 41 probably, hopefully, by February of next year. I don't think anybody's ever done it. They can't keep the congressman out, which is wonderful because I don't talk to them about politics. I talk to them about liberty and try to set that fire in those young minds. So, liberty's not like peak oil, it's like solar. It's only limited by our ability to harness it and use it for the greater good. Now, when I go to bed tonight, I promise I'll be worried about a dozen things. That's okay. Harness that. Let that motivate you. Understand that individual liberty, that the right of individuals towards self-determination, that bestowing upon not just America but the world the blessings of freedom to ourselves and our posterity is under threat. But that's a good thing, because if it weren't, why would we get out of bed? What is it that we would be compelled to do if it weren't? So, I'll paraphrase an early political friend and mentor and say this: it is an honor to have the opportunity to be a gladiator in the arena of ideas. And when the discourse degenerates to invective and ad hominem attacks and name-calling, you can know you're winning, which means press the fight. Press the fight. Not to take from others, but to give to all, because, folks, as a nation, as an idea, whether it's a 37-year-old lawyer named Patrick Henry, trained to speak in front of other individuals, or a 16-year-old high school student named Barbara Johns, who had the courage of her convictions, that's who we are. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth fighting to protect. God bless you. Thank you for the opportunity.